On Taiwan Talk this week.
There's an old cliche from the military I used to hear all the time, which is that the best propaganda is the truth. And I, in my own view anyway, I try to carry that into my work with GTI.
As Deputy Director of the Washington, D.C.-based Global Taiwan Institute, John Dotson is part of a team that looks to build a better understanding of Taiwan for a U.S. audience. Dotson feels an affinity for the island, one that began when he was a student decades before. He shares his story as well as GTI's hopes for the next 4 years in this week's edition of Taiwan Talk.
Well, I actually come from a small town in rural Alabama, and so not many folks necessarily go into the field of Asian studies from that. But as I was entering college, I had a strong interest in history and sort of a general sense that I was interested in working in government or in the policy field. So I began taking Chinese classes, and that kind of connected to or led to an exchange program, which at that time, the University of Alabama had an exchange agreement where every year there were a couple of graduates from Hope Ngo in Taichung who could get scholarships for master's degrees at Alabama. And in my senior year, I was fortunate. I applied for that program and was selected. And so after I graduated in 1994, I feel very old. I moved to Taichung and spent a couple years there at Hope Ngo. And that sort of started certainly the personal connection with Taiwan, which through I guess a few twists and turns is still with me today.
What was Taichung like back then?
Well, it's actually been quite striking to go back more recently, and unfortunately, I haven't had the chance to go back to Taichung specifically in a number of years. I've done a couple of trips to Taiwan for work over the last couple of years. Unfortunately, only in Taipei. I didn't get the chance to go around the rest of the island. But at least in the 90s, it was a really interesting period of time. Taichung was growing very rapidly. In some respects, it was a bit of an unruly city. I know it had quite a reputation of sort of being Taiwan's mafia city, fairly or unfairly. I didn't see a great deal of that from my personal experience, except for maybe one. But no, it was a really great experience for me. And Taiwan itself during that time was really in a transitional phase. It was one in which, the martial law period was over. Taiwan was holding free elections. There was a free press. Although the Kuomintang still sort of had legacy control of just about all the institutions of government in Taiwan, but Taiwan was undergoing that process of democratization, and it was a really fascinating time to be there.
Okay, let's contrast your time in Taichung with growing up in a small town in the southern part of the United States. Was it a shock for you coming over here?
There was certainly a little bit of culture shock, sure. I'd grown up as an Army brat. My father was a career Army officer, so we'd moved a bit when I was a kid, but always someplace within the South. And I did more growing up in Alabama than any place else, so that's sort of a home base for me. And yes, I did live in a rural area, and it certainly was a bit of a shock as a college student. Actually, the first time I went to Taiwan was actually in my junior year. I was able to go there for a semester just for language study. And yes, really, having never been out of the country before, traveling on my own, to go to, a large city where I really didn't know anyone and hardly spoke any of the language at all was very, it was a little disconcerting. It was a bit of a sink or swim experience, but, one that I think proved, perhaps fruitful in the long term.
Okay, most memorable experience in Taichung. I know you talked to me about one experience, but I'm wondering if that's the same experience that you would consider to be the most memorable.
That might be the single most amusing anecdote. I mean, I don't know that there were so many experiences there that were really great. The one particular instance, which I told you before, that actually and it actually does kind of connect to once again that reputation. Fairly or unfairly, that Taichung had as being a major center for organized crime.
Go on then.
I lived there for 2 years, 94 to 96, and it was in the autumn of 96 that I was getting ready to return to America. And the final week I was there, I had to go to the office of the Foreign Affairs Police to get my exit visa stamped, declare my intent to depart Taiwan. And on leaving the police station, while exiting the building and walking across the road, I saw a car coming down the road that was kind of weaving out of control. And I remember thinking, well, hey, that car's out of control. It's going to the parking lot. It's going to hit that car. That's my car. And sure enough, it veered off in the parking lot, kind of rammed into my car, and then kind of like kept going and gradually rolled to a stop in the field next to the lot. And there was, and I, I ran over to it. There was another, a local man who was also on the street who saw this happening, who was running out there with me, and just thinking, maybe was the driver having a heart attack, something like that. But we got out to the car, and we saw the driver inside was a man who he had a shirt and tie, but also you could see the tattoos on the side of his neck peeking out above the shirt collar, and also peeking out from his shirt sleeve onto his wrist. And I remember thinking, okay. But I wasn't sure what was happening to him, but he was having some sort of medical emergency, and I don't know if it was a cardiac incident that had caused him to lose control. But I was just kind of thinking, okay, well, what can we do? Well, okay, it's really hot. Let's roll down the windows. Let's ease the seat back so he can lie back, and just see if there's something we can do to help him. And after a minute or two, a police officer came out from the station to see what was going on. And kind of like walked over, looked around, like took a glance inside the car, looked at me and the other guy, just kind of nodded, didn't say anything, turned around and left. Which, I think, without any words, that in and of itself, I think, indicates a lot of what was perhaps hiding below the surface of certain sections of Taiwan society at the time. But
it didn't put you off from dedicating your life literally to working for the interests of Taiwan.
Well, once again, being in Taiwan at that period of time when it was undergoing its democratic transition was also very inspiring to see how the people of this society were trying to emerge from under the shadow of a dictatorship and undergo that very messy, very difficult transition to being a pluralistic democracy. And I would say that really stuck with me. Now, in subsequent years, after I returned to the United States in the fall of '96, I subsequently did a number of things. I actually went to the Navy. After that, for several years, I went to Officer Candidate School. I was commissioned as a Navy officer, where I served for several years, and then also served for an advisory commission of Congress, and sort of developed or got into the field of research on the Chinese military and Chinese politics.
Sorry, did you get a chance to come back during that time?
A couple times briefly, not very much. Actually, unfortunately, I wish I did. My current job, I've been on the staff of the Global Taiwan Institute for, I guess, coming up on 4 years now. Prior to taking that job, I actually had not been back to Taiwan for many years, it was like 12, 13 years. I think it had been a good long time. But I've, in the course of my work with GTI over the last couple of years, I've had a couple of chances to go back briefly. And again, in that sense, it's kind of striking to see how Taiwan has continued to change and develop. Certainly a lot different from how it was back in the 90s.
How do you think it's going to be in the next 4 years? I know there's plenty of concern about instability. Where do you see your role and the role of the Global Taiwan Institute in the coming 4 years?
We are a small 501c3 think tank in Washington, D.C. And as our name would suggest, our focus is strictly on Taiwan-related issues, and in tandem with that, on U.S.-Taiwan relations. And we're a pro-Taiwan think tank. I think we do try to focus on building a greater public understanding of sort of what Taiwan is and sort of the value of Taiwan in U.S.-Taiwan relations. Within that, there's an old cliche from the military I used to hear all the time, which is that the best propaganda is the truth. And I, in my own view anyway, I try to carry that into my work with GTI. I think we've been reasonably successful. I think GTI has indeed, in the course of the 8 years or so that it's been in existence, has helped to sort of increase the public awareness about Taiwan and Taiwan-related issues. Now, GTI has been doing that work also in a period of time where just on its own, Taiwan has come to have sort of a greater position of prominence in the U.S. policy community. I mean, I can clearly recall from past years, if you go back 10, 15 years or more, issues related to Taiwan were almost always treated within the context of U.S. PRC, or People's Republic of China, relations, and even sort of as a subset of that. And now, over the last, few years, we've seen U.S.-China relations have really deteriorated. In tandem with that, maybe there's a silver lining to that, and that it has opened up a little bit more space for U.S. engagement with Taiwan. And so the work of GTI has sort of coincided, I think, with a general shift in the level of attention Taiwan gets, but also in the conventional wisdom as it relates both to U.S.-China relations and to U.S. relations with Taiwan. And there's been movement in a number of areas, certainly both during the Trump-1 administration and the Biden administration, in terms of closer relations with Taiwan, in terms of increased arms sales, in terms of increased government-to-government engagement, even if that isn't always through official diplomatic channels. The value of promoting the value of Taiwan as a democratic partner, as a member of the sort of international community of democratic nations. So yeah, I think there's been a real sea change over the last few years in the relations between the U.S. and Taiwan, and I like to think that GTI has played at least a small role in helping to promote that.
You were listening to John Dotson, Deputy Director of the Global Taiwan Institute. And that does it for this week's edition of Taiwan Talk. You can catch this show on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, or wherever you get your podcasts. I'm Hope Ngo. Until next time, thank you for tuning in.